course, if it did, the president would have to respond to it. There are multiple examples throughout American history of the president doing just that.
You didn't say military in your answer, and you've made it very clear you believe the president can defy the Supreme Court. Senator, thanks for your time this morning.
No, George.
Roundtable's up next. We'll be right back.
I'm going to play more of this absolutely wild interview on ABC News in just a second that ends in that moment where George Stephanopoulos just cuts off the interview and the tech people mute Republican Senator J.D. Vance's mic. Truly incredible stuff. The entire interview. And Stephanopoulos obliterates J.D. Vance, repeatedly confronting him in a powerful manner on multiple subjects. So let's go through it. First, Stephanopoulos begins the interview by playing some of Vance's past statements about Donald Trump, given that he's now a big fan, publicly at least, of Trump. Take a look at this.
I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place. He's leading our political discourse to a very negative place. If Trump is elected president, he has to be a much different president than he was a candidate. As a candidate, he was fundamentally divisive, arrogant. I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
That was J.D. Vance back in 2016. Now he's a Republican senator from Ohio supporting Donald Trump, and he joins us this morning. Senator, thank you for joining us this morning. Back in 2016, you also wrote that Trump is unfit for office. Why have you reversed yourself?
Well, I think in office, actually, George, he did a great job, and he proved me wrong. He also proved a lot of other people wrong, which is why I think he's doing so well in the polls these days. We have to remember, George, that Joe Biden promised to return to normalcy.
And then Vance goes on to espouse the same talking points we hear constantly. But this is a phenomenon that we deal with all too often in American politics lately because of Trump. People say all sorts of things about him. He's unfit, horrible character, true, and all this stuff. Then they feel out the political wins and go, oh, I still want to be popular in the GOP. Never mind. Ignore all that. Trump's my guy. And we talked about this in a previous recent segment with Nancy Mace, where after January 6th, she rightfully blamed Trump for what happened and said he should be held accountable. And then she flipped very quickly and became super MAGA. And she used to praise Nikki Haley a bunch, big ally. Now she's saying Haley's horrible as she's endorsing Trump. It's just so predictable. A pretty wild game, though, that gets played. And then in this next moment, Stephanopoulos confronted J.D. Vance over what he said about January 6th and his apparent belief that the VP shouldn't have certified the election results. Take a look at this bonkers clip.
Mr. Donald Trump.
So you're not troubled by the sexual assault and defamation. Let me ask you about January 6th. You've been mentioned as a possible vice president for Donald Trump. Had you been vice president on January 6th, would you have certified the election results?
Oh, George, this is such a ridiculous question, in part because the law has changed here. We, of course, had
I didn't ask you about going forward. I asked you what you would have done. I asked you what you would have done.
George, here's what I think. Here's what I think happened in 2020. And I know you guys are obsessed with talking about this. I have to make a point here. You constantly say to people like me, why do you talk about January the 6th? Why do you talk about the election of 2020? And then you ask about us multiple times during a 6-minute interview. But look, you asked the question and I'll answer it. Do I think there were problems in 2020? Yes, I do. And I think there is a political solution to those problems. So litigating which slate of electors was legitimate, I think is fundamentally the political solution to the problems that existed in 2020. It's a reasonable debate to have. And I find it weird, George, that people like you obsess with what I call what happened in 2020. You're so incurious about what actually happened in 2020, which is why so many people mistrust our elections in this country. We've got to do better, George.
I'm not the least bit incurious. In fact, you laid out a litany there, but you didn't answer the question I asked. Would you have certified the election results had you been vice president?
If I had been vice president, I would have told the states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so many others that we needed to have multiple slates of electors, and I think the U.S. Congress should have fought over it from there. That is the legitimate way to deal with an election that a lot of folks, including me, think had a lot of problems in 2020. I think that's what we should have done.
So it's very clear you would have done what Donald Trump asked you to do there, not what Vice President Mike Pence did.
Think about how insane that clip is. First off, he acts like it's weird that the media keeps asking about 2020. Get over it. And whether or not these Republicans think democracy should have been allowed to continue. Yeah, you're damn right. The media is going to keep asking about that to remind the American people that people like you, JD, needed to be voted or need to be voted out of office. Because when you finally address the question directly, you essentially answer, no, you wouldn't have certified the lawful electoral count. Think about how ridiculous his answer was. I would have told states to send 2 slates of electors and then we can just figure it out from there. How does he imagine that playing out? Hi, this is Vice President J.D. Vance, and I know you already sent your lawful, certified electors, and those have already cast their vote for the proper person based on the election in your state, but can you just send a different one? Because we're going to fight it out here up in Washington. That's not the legitimate process. That's not what's laid out in the Constitution. The states had already certified and sent their electors. So do your ceremonial role and shut up about it. It's crazy. We live right now in a moment. Really think about this, where we're debating whether or not elections should have been allowed to pick the president. I think Congress should have decided. Yeah. Election schmection, who cares? Send a second slate and let us take it from there. Crazy. And just because he has practiced a sort of pseudo-intellectual way to explain that doesn't mean it's any less crazy. Then next moment, Stephanopoulos confronts J.D. Vance over his statements encouraging Trump to get in office, uproot the entire bureaucracy, and staff it with exclusively loyalists, then just ignore the courts and do whatever he wants.
Because you will get taken to court, and then when the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it.
Fire everyone in the government, then defy the Supreme Court. You think it's okay for the president to defy the Supreme Court?
No, George, I did not say fire everyone in the government. I said replace the mid-level bureaucrats with people who are responsive to the administration's agenda.
Every civil servant in the administrative state.
No, George. I said the mid-level bureaucrats, and one of the problems that we have in this government.
You said every civil servant in the administrative state.
Let me finish the answer, George. You asked the question. We have a major problem here with administrators and bureaucrats in the government who don't respond to the elected branches. Whoever is in charge, agree or disagree with them, you have to follow the rules. If those people aren't following the rules, then of course you've got to fire them. And of course the president has to be able to run the government as he thinks he should. That's the way the Constitution works. It has been thwarted too much by the way our bureaucracy has worked over the past 15 years.
The Constitution also says the president must abide by legitimate Supreme Court rulings, doesn't it?
The Constitution says that the Supreme Court can make rulings, but if the Supreme Court, and look, I hope that they would not do this, but if the Supreme Court said the President of the United States can't fire a general, that would be an illegitimate ruling, and the President has to have Article 2 prerogative under the Constitution to actually run the military as he sees fit. This is just basic constitutional legitimacy. You're talking about a hypothetical where the Supreme Court tries to run the military. I don't think that's going to happen, George, but of course, if it did, the President would have to respond to it. There are multiple examples throughout American history of the President doing just that.
You didn't say military in your answer, and you've made it very clear you believe the president can defy the Supreme Court. Senator, thanks for your time this morning.
No, George.
Roundtable's up next. We'll be right back.
What an interview. My goodness. And good for George Stephanopoulos. They had a conversation in the control room before the interview about what they'd do at the end of the interview if he kept talking, because they were quick. Boom, mute that mic right when Stephanopoulos cut off the interview. That's how every single interview needs to be conducted on mainstream media. Hold their feet to the fire, cut them off when they continue to spew nonsense, point out, explicitly say, you didn't answer my question over and over again. Because a lot of times viewers just we all have been in this place. You're listening and you're just kind of getting lost in this really long, rambly answer, and you kind of forget that they're not at all addressing what was asked. But Stephanopoulos made it very clear that J.D. Vance wasn't, and then call out the dishonesty. Then when it all goes wrong, just cut off the interview and mute the mic. Fantastic. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, and you can become a member at lukebeasleyshow.com/membership.